I believe my dad always dreamed of becoming an architect or an engineer, and life circumstances prevented that from ever happening. And so he tried to hand the dream off to me. Oh, we never talked about it, but looking back, it was pretty obvious. We never missed an opportunity to visit a construction site. The bigger, the better. We frequented airports. We checked out construction vehicles. He showed me his tools that he had gotten from an architectural school correspondence class. And then there was Christmas. Always something to build with. From blocks to Lincoln logs to Legos and to countless other kinds of construction things. It was always there, building, building, building. He would spend hours with me doing that. He taught me how to draw. He was upset when I didn't take mechanical drawing. It conflicted with band. I thought it was a no-brainer. He was not of the same mind. I've often wondered if he lived longer, would we have had a major knockdown, drag-out vocational conversation? As it was, I went off to seminary and not architect school. The irony was, the language that was being touted in those days in seminary was building language. Build up the church. And we were given tools to do that. The only problem was the tools were outdated. They were used for a church that no longer existed. Oh, it worked for a while, particularly in those early 80s and 90s when we were experiencing a boom of children again. But it has quickly died. And now we struggle as church. The tools we were given are virtually useless. So what do we do? Where do we look for models as we move forward? There's an interesting story in Matthew's Gospel. It's a very familiar story. It's in the other Gospels as well. Jesus asked the disciples, "Who do you say that I am?" And like today, the polls reveal the answers all over the map. But Peter pipes up and says, "I got this one. You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And Jesus says, "You got that right, Peter. In fact, Peter, on this rock," a little play on his name, "I will build my church." Building language. On Peter, the foundation, the rock. Must have been great news to Matthew's community as they heard those words for the first time. For Matthew's community was mostly Jewish or Jewish converts. This language about building the church on Peter must have sounded a lot like, "Let's make Israel great again." The irony is that within a few short sentences, Jesus was calling Peter Satan when he tried to get Jesus to do an end run around Jerusalem and the cross. Peter's an interesting choice to build the church on. Impetuous Peter, always opening his mouth only to insert his foot. Peter, who on that night on the stormy Sea of Galilee, when Jesus comes walking on the water, jumps up and wants to walk on the water too. Jesus says, "Sure, come on." The wind and the waves get the best of Peter, and he goes down like a stone, like a rock. We all know the end of the gospel. When Jesus gets arrested, Peter denies ever knowing Jesus 3 times before the cock crows. So why would one choose Peter to build the church on? I think we have to look at Peter after the resurrection. The Peter that recognizes Jesus on the shores when they've all gone fishing. Peter who takes the call, the recall, if you would, when Jesus asked him to feed his sheep. But most especially, I think it's Peter that we hear about in the Acts of the Apostles. Peter is a Judaizer. He is one who believes that Christianity must be seen in the context of Judaism, and that if one wants to profess one's Christian faith, one has to be Jewish or become Jewish, which means circumcision, which isn't exactly seeker-friendly, if one wants to be baptized. This was more than likely the context of Matthew's community that he was speaking to. What happens, however, to Peter is that Peter has a bit of a conversion. In a dream, God reveals that he's wrong, that the future of the church, of Christianity, is to the world, not just to the Jews. And Peter then changes his behavior and his attitude toward becoming Christian and sees baptism, like Paul, as being the mark of the Christian faith and not circumcision. It's this conversion, this reformation of Peter, that I believe is critical for us to understand what's needed in the church today. Luther talked about the church always reforming, and I think we're in a time of great reformation, a time where we see change, and not always comfortably. One of the things that's become apparent to me as I've grown into my ministry is that Christianity began as a movement, and we've created an institution. And institutions are designed to protect themselves and perpetuate themselves. But institutions inevitably die. What would happen if we saw Christianity as a movement these days, rather than a church? What if we saw the presence of God in the midst of the world in which we live, and that's the context for our ministry, amongst our neighbors, not within the four walls of our churches? What if we saw telling the story as being a natural part of what it means to be Christian to those who have never heard it before, or to remind those that have heard it? What if we share our faith easily in daily conversation, in those rites and rituals, not of the church, but of the world? One of the great gifts that Christianity, one of the great successes of Christianity over the centuries was their ability to take what was already present in the world and adopt it and adapt it. Where can we make that kind of an impact on the world around us, that it may see the world differently through the eyes of Christ, rather than the jaundiced eyes we tend to use these days? Where is the spirit of Peter alive among his people, God's people? What's God calling us to do? How can we be present for a broken world? Some food for thought. Amen.